I think it's pretty fair to say that across the board, most people think that Activision is the gold standard for games released on the Atari VCS, the original 2600. And I think prior to beginning this video project, I would have agreed with that, but I'm not so sure that's my takeaway now. So this is a video idea by a viewer over on my personal vlog, Akashic Record. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Akashic said, hey, why don't you do a tier list of all of the Activision games for the VCS? And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's start digging around. There are 44 games released by Activision for the Atari VCS. And over the course of doing this video, I realized that maybe Activision has that reputation not because all of their games are the best, but because they have a disproportionate number of amazing games in their library. So in this video, we're gonna run through and rank and rate all 44 original Activision games for the Atari VCS, and we're gonna get started right after this. This video brought to you in part by Tommy in the Order of Cosmic Champions. This exciting and heartwarming coming-of-age Gen X novel is available now. Check the link for more info. Hey there, welcome back to Gen X Grown Up. I'm John and I am a Gen X Grown Up. Thank you so much for clicking through to check out this video. I want to get started because we have a lot of ground to cover, but let me just real quickly tell you the criteria. I think it'd be very easy to look back at these Activision games through a nostalgic lens. Which ones are the most famous or the most well-known or the most distributed on plug-and-plays or gadgets or toys or whatever, but my target here is, as best as possible, I'm going to consider if little 10-year-old Johnny, if he had spent $30 of his allowance on a game at Electronics Boutique or Babbage's or wherever you would have gotten a game, brought it home and plugged it in, where would I have ranked? Where would he have ranked these games? So we're going to rank them from F up to A, letter grades, or S for superb. That's what tier lists do. So without further ado, why don't we get started? We're going to go alphabetically here, not in order of quality, and we're going to start with Barnstorming. Now, Barnstorming came out in 1982, and I remember loving the look of this game, but the reality is the longer you play it, the more samey it is. It just becomes an exercise in dodging the geese and trying to guess, is the next thing coming across the screen going to be a barn or going to be one of these weather vane towers? And you just kind of go up and down, fast and slow, and try to get the highest score. I think we'll find as we progress here that a lot of early Activision games weren't so much about how do I make the most amazing game, but how do I make a game better than Atari is making it? And while they succeeded here, I'm only going to rank Barnstorming a C on our tier list. Okay, let's move along then to Beam Rider. Now, Beam Rider is really just kind of your average shooter, but it does a really good job of creating some perspective on the play field, and you can see these enemies coming up these columns or beams. I will say that it is far and above what Atari was doing at the time, but it isn't necessarily something you might want to write home about, so I'm going to put Beam Rider a B on our tier list. Up next alphabetically is Boxing. Okay, this is nothing more than a nose-punching simulator. I remember when I first saw Boxing, and I thought from the screenshot, this is going to be amazing, it's so realistic. But it's this weird bird's eye view of the top of your boxers' heads, and you can try to get their gloves to punch the nose of the other guy, and they just can kind of move back and forth and do that. It doesn't have a ton of replay value, although the AI at least is present, so you can play by yourself if you don't have a friend, but it's just not a great example of what Activision has in their library, so this one's going to be our first D on the tier list. Up next is one of the most exciting video games ever, Bridge. Now, I say that facetiously, but Activision's Bridge is actually a pretty nice version of Bridge. If you are a fan of playing the card game, this is a fun game to play. It has all the rules there, and I could see this sucking up a lot of your time because if you don't have a friend to play a real card game with, having Bridge on your computer, much like having Blackjack back when the VCS launched, I can see that having a lot of value. And in my play of it, despite its rudimentary appearance, it is everything you want out of a Bridge game, honestly. I don't know what else you could do, so I'm going to rank Bridge a B on our tier list. And following up right behind that is Checkers, another board game, well, card game, board game. So here's Checkers, and you'll notice as I'm showing you Checkers, sometimes the screen goes black. That's not a mistake I made. That's not a glitch in emulation. The VCS, the way it was programmed to play checkers, it's got to blank the screen to think about its next move. And the pacing is absolutely drudgerous. You should never play checkers on your VCS with this version from Activision. So checkers is going to have the dubious distinction as our first F. on our tier list. Continuing with the C's, we're up now to Chopper Command. Now, Chopper Command, this is another example of, hey, Activision, can you do what Atari's doing better? And I think they pretty much did here. Chopper Command is kind of Activision's version of Defender. And they did it with less flickering, more activity, more interest. You have a convoy of vehicles at the bottom of the screen you're trying to protect. And when you watch it being played, it's very easy to map a Defender gameplay mechanic right onto what you see. Even the bullets that are fired from your chopper look like that long streak of lightning fire that comes out of the front of a Defender ship. So Chopper Command was something I can say with authority that little Johnny would enjoy. So that's going to be an A on our tier list. Up next is an arcade port that came along late in the life of the VCS, 1988. This is the arcade port Activision did for Commando. Now, Activision did here what they always do, get more out of the graphics capabilities of the VCS, but this port of the arcade classic, though it looks pretty decent, it's pretty limited in its gameplay. There's a finite number of things that can be on screen at once because of the VCS, and you only have one button, so you have to long press for grenades and short press for bullets, and it's a little bit unfair, honestly, because you have large sprites on a low resolution screen, so it's pretty hard to get away from when you're being fired at. So Commando, that's going to be a C on our tier list. Up next is one that I'll admit I didn't know incredibly well before I started this video, but I know it a lot better now. Cosmic Commuter. Now, its name invokes for me the idea of like, oh, is this like Crazy Taxi or something? And it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. The thing that I like most about this game is that there's a lot to do. You start the game coming into land, your little lunar lander on the planet, and then you have to fly by and pick up commuters, you gotta fight off enemies, you gotta gather fuel, you gotta keep shooting and not get hit. This is just a fast action game, and one that I wish I played more when I was younger, but one that now I realize I really missed out on. So Cosmic Commuter, despite my lack of familiarity with it, is going to be an A on our tier list. So up next is another one I'll admit I didn't play a ton of when I was younger, but that was absolutely a mistake. We're talking about Crackpots. If you like Kaboom, Crackpots is kind of reverse Kaboom with even more to do. The idea is that you are now the guy at the top, and spiders are trying to make their way up the building and get in your window. And you can push these flower pots down to squish the spiders before they make it to the top. The spiders get more difficult. You have ones that go straight, or ones that go zigzag, or one that go across the screen diagonally, and it gets harder and harder to kill those spiders. Look, if you missed out on this one, this is one that should go to the top of your playlist and start playing right away. This is going to be our first superb on our tier list, and it absolutely deserves it. On to the D's, and now it's Decathlon. It's actually called Activision's Decathlon, or whatever. We're going to call it Decathlon. That's what most people know it as. Decathlon is effectively Activision's attempt to bring track and field to the home computer. Now, they put out Decathlon on almost every platform, and you have all these different activities you can take place in. Now, I will say that there's almost no sound to speak of in this game. You have an opening song, but beyond that, it's just footsteps and footsteps. It's just tick, 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 tick. There's not a lot to hear. But because of the high score nature of this game and the variety of things to do, Decathlon is going to rank an A on our tier list. Now we're going to head to the ocean with Dolphin. Dolphin really does not impress me. It never has. You're pretty much swimming back and forth, dodging this squid. Part of the gameplay mechanic is listening for audio cues, not unlike that sonar prototype that we checked out not too long ago. But all in all, the game just feels flat, like there's something missing. It feels like a good start of a game, but there's not that much replayability there. So I'm going to rate a Dolphin D on our tier list. Okay, you ready for a winner? Too bad. It's time for Double Dragon instead. Wow, Double Dragon is awful on the VCS. Some games just should never be ported to the VCS. And this is one that certainly not with the capabilities we had back in '88 should never have made it. It doesn't have any of the spirit of the game, none of the adventure. It's individual screens. You get two incredibly difficult guys to fight with limited controls, and they are brutal. And if you happen to kill the two of them, you get another screen with two more guys. There's not much variety to the game. It just feels flat. There's a little music there, but even for Activision, this thing feels like a janky port. So this one's going right to the bottom. F on my tier list. Rounding out the D's then with Dragster. Okay. This is a great tech demo. It's not a game. If you are nuts about drag racing, I could see how this could be interesting to time, you know, when you're going to shift and when you're going to accelerate and that sort of thing. And I know that it has a storied history of some potential cheating with the high score holders or whatever, but if you play this game, it's such a one-trick pony. Once you've seen what this game has to offer, it's not much. There's not much replayability there. So little Johnny would not be happy. This is going to be a D on our Activision tier list. Moving on up into the E's with Enduro. Now, Enduro is a cross-country road race that if you haven't played, you shouldn't sleep on it. There's a quota of cars to pass, there's different kinds of weather. Like, it's not the best racing game ever, but for the VCS, for the era, it was really good. It reminded me a lot of Turbo, kind of a low-res version of Turbo, the arcade game. And the way that road curves, I found it to be very unique and innovative for the VCS. And I just always liked Enduro. It maybe was the best racing game of the time that you could get on the VCS. There were more to come later, but Enduro is going to absolutely rank an A, toward the top of our list in the tier. Well, I was just getting dry from jumping in the water with Dolphin, and now it's back to the pier for Fishing Derby, where you and a competitive fisherman try to get fish that are down underneath this pier and try to get them to the top before a shark can eat them. I love the risk-reward mechanic of this, where the deeper the fish is that you catch, the more points you're going to get. But then if you lose that fish, all that time was wasted. So it's a kind of this give and take, this little bit of a dance, and also predicting how much the fish will fight and how aggressive the shark is going to be. And there's computer AI that's not too bad, it's not cheap, and it's actually pretty fair, and will give you a challenge while still having a chance to win. This game is almost superb. So Fishing Derby is going to rate an A on my tier. Up next, coincidentally, even though we're going alphabetically, are two Frogger-inspired games, and the first one is Freeway. It's the video game answer to the joke, why did the chicken cross the road? But once you get the joke, there's not a lot of game here that you're going to enjoy. Your chicken can only go up and down, not left or right. It's a weird example of a game that's less than the sum of its parts. The sound effects for the traffic are great, the animation for the chicken is funny, the overall tone, mood, and graphics of the street look really good, but when you put it all together, it again is one of those one-trick ponies that when you're tired of moving your stick straight up to make the chicken cross the road, there's not much left for you. So Freeway on the tier, that's going to be a D. But now we move on to the second game that was clearly Frogger inspired, and that's Frostbite. Now, here's a game that you should be paying attention to. Rather than just being a Me Too, pulling one element from Frogger, Frostbite takes the element of Frogger, kind of leaping from, would have been like turtle to turtle or turtle to log, and makes them ice flows. The concept is it's getting increasingly colder. You need to jump around, dodging the enemies, collecting ice cubes that you can use to build your igloo, and then get back to your igloo before the temperature drops so far that your character dies. I didn't play a lot of this one when I was very young, but I found it about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's become one of my go-to favorites. It's challenging, it's clever, the way it increases difficulty is not just speed up, but changing the sizes of the ice flows and the different enemies. This is great. This is a superb on the tier list, and one that you should add to your playlist if you don't already play it. Okay, moving along then, just a few left in this first half. Ghostbusters. Now, a huge franchise, was released on plenty of platforms. I played a ton of it on the Atari 8-bit. This is the Atari 2600 version, and it's fine. It has the Ghostbusters music, it has all the mechanics of the different ways you can outfit your Ecto. You can go to the city street, drop a trap, and try to catch Slimer. All that's there, but none of it really shines. It's all watered down for the VCS, and look, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's middle of the road as far as I'm concerned, so I'm going to give Ghostbusters a solid C, right in the middle of the tier. Up next is another racing game, Grand Prix. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say a lot about Grand Prix. I think this was, again, the era of Activision trying to see if they could do racing better than Atari did. So the cars look amazing, the shading on the side of the different colors is really nice, but racing left to right, you hit the button to accelerate a little bit, and it doesn't get much of a sense of speed, and then you're done. There's no variety in the road, no weather changes, nothing like that. This is just a so-so game, so I'm going to put it a D on our tier. Up next, though, is a game that I've played since the day it came out, and somehow this game is almost as good on every platform it's ever appeared on, and that's H.E.R.O. H.E.R.O. really gives me that sense of adventure with varied maps and paths and places that you can go. The concept is this spelunker got trapped underground, and you as this little hero have to use your little helicopter backpack to find your way down inside of the cavern to rescue the guy who's stranded. Along the way, you can use your eye laser to shoot bats and snakes and whoever else gets in your way, and you can drop little sticks of dynamite to blow up walls. I never understood how this game was even possible on the VCS. It's one of those that surprised me every time I played it. This is a great big S, superb on H.E.R.O. Just a couple more here, stick with me. Up next is ice hockey. And I'll say for a 1981 ice hockey game, this is pretty remarkable. there's not a lot of variety, but ice hockey is ice hockey. You don't need a lot of variety. What you need is the rules of the sport and a way to play single player and a way to play with your friends, and ice hockey has all this. It looks pretty good, even though it's limited to just 2 players. Ice hockey is a respectable entry and one that deserves its spot as a B on our tier list. Okay, this marks number 22, the halfway point in the 44 games that we're going to be checking out. And this is a goodie, coincidentally, alphabetically, Kaboom. This game with a criminal dropping bombs from the top of a wall and you with your little water buckets at the bottom trying to catch them and snuff them out is one of, if not the, de facto best paddle games ever on the Atari VCS. It's hard to believe Activision released this all the way back in 1981, but that's what they did, and man did they catch lightning in a bottle with this one. It's challenging, it's charming, it's rewarding, and it absolutely earns its spot as a superb at the top of our tier list. Whew, okay. Take a breath. We've reached the halfway point. 22 of the 44 Activision titles we now have tier ranked. Here's the tier as it looks right now. You can see there's a lot of games, probably some of your favorites, still in the second half. I'm going to break this video into 2 parts, this being part 1. In the conclusion of this 2-part video, we'll be fleshing out and completing this entire Activision tier. So I'll put a link right here as soon as that video is available. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this first part, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.